The Eyes of Isabelle. Your name is Antoine. The crisp October wind swept through the cobblestone alleys of Lyon's Croix-Rousse district as you wrestled with the last box. You'd finally made it. Your new attic apartment, despite being a fifth-floor walk-up, had an undeniable old-world charm, exposed oak beams, creaking floorboards, and a small window overlooking the city's terracotta rooftops. This was a fresh start, a place to focus on your art studies, far from the hustle of Paris. After the realtor hurried off, leaving you with a cluster of old iron keys, the silence of the building truly settled in. One of the keys, smaller and more ornate than the rest, didn't fit any of the locks. Curious, you tried it on a low, almost hidden door at the end of the hallway. It fit. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, steep, dust-choked staircase leading up to the attic. The air in the attic was stagnant and smelled of decaying wood and old paper. The light from your phone swept across forgotten furniture draped in white cloths, like sleeping ghosts. And then you saw it. Leaning against a brick wall, uncovered, was an oil painting. It was a portrait of a woman, painted perhaps a century ago. She wasn't classically beautiful, but it was her eyes that held you. They were dark, deep, and held a sadness that seemed too vast to be contained within a frame. Feeling a strange compulsion to rescue it from decay, you carefully carried it downstairs. You wiped away the grime and found a place for it on the largest wall in your living room, directly opposite the sofa. As you stepped back to admire your work, you couldn't help but feel that the room was suddenly less empty. The woman's eyes in the painting seemed to follow you, a silent sentinel in your new home. The first few days passed in a blur of unpacking and exploring the neighborhood. But every time you returned to the apartment, the silence greeted you. And those eyes, at first, it was small things. You'd leave your keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them on the windowsill. You chalked it up to the stress of the move, to your own forgetfulness. But the feeling of being watched grew harder to ignore. Sometimes, while sitting on the sofa, you'd get a prickling sensation on the back of your neck, as if someone were standing right behind you. You'd turn, and of course, no one was there. Just the painting. One night, you were woken by a faint whisper. Tiptoeing to the door, you peered into the living room. Moonlight streamed through the window. For a fleeting moment, you could have sworn the corner of the woman's mouth had turned up into a barely perceptible smile. The feeling of being watched had become a constant presence. The changes in the painting grew more pronounced. One day, you noticed a single tear seemed to be welling in the corner of her eye, glistening in the morning light. Hours later, it was gone. Another time, the position of the brooch on her dress seemed to have shifted. You started taking pictures of the painting every day, a desperate attempt to prove your own sanity. Sleep was no longer an escape. Nightmares began to plague you. In these dreams, you were wandering through your own apartment, but it was distorted and unfamiliar, covered in a thick layer of dust. You would hear sobbing from behind closed doors, and you always knew she was there, just out of sight, her shadow flitting past a doorway. The fear was visceral, waking you in a cold sweat. After a week of relentless anxiety, you couldn't take it anymore. You had to know what this painting was. Carefully taking the painting off the wall, you wrapped it in a blanket and made your way to Vieux Lyon, the old Renaissance district. You found a small antique shop run by an elderly man named Monsieur Dubois. The moment Monsieur Dubois saw the painting, his smile faded. He took a step back, his face pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. You told him about the apartment. He listened intently, glancing at the portrait with a mixture of fear and awe. "There are stories," Dubois said, "about the woman painted here. They call her La Femme en Deuil, the grieving woman." Monsieur Dubois' warning only fueled your determination. Back in the apartment, with the painting now feeling ominously heavier, You began your search at the city archives. Finally, in the brittle pages of Le Progrès de Lyon from 1888, you found her. Her name was Isabelle Renaud. She had lived in your very building, in your very apartment. She was married to a painter named Jean-Luc. The article told a tragic story. Jean-Luc had mysteriously disappeared. Isabelle, left alone, became the subject of rumors and suspicion. Some claimed she had murdered him. She died 2 years later, alone and despised. Knowing Isabelle's story changed everything. The presence in the apartment was no longer an anonymous force. It had a name, a face, a tragedy, and it was growing bolder. You'd sometimes hear soft sobbing, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. The temperature in the living room would drop suddenly for no reason, centered around the painting. The most disturbing phenomenon began with reflective surfaces. You'd catch a fleeting glimpse of a figure in the bathroom mirror, a dark shape with the silhouette of a woman in a long dress. Walking past a shop window on the street for a split second, your reflection would be superimposed with a pale face with tormented eyes. Isabelle's eyes. You began to fear your own reflection. You covered the single mirror in the apartment with a towel. She was no longer confined to her frame. She was leaking into your world. Your world was shrinking. The obsession with the painting had become your entire life. You stopped going to your art classes. Your sketchbooks were now filled with nothing but obsessive, repeated images of Isabelle's eyes. You ignored calls from friends and family. You'd lost weight. The dark circles under your eyes were almost as pronounced as the woman's in the painting. You would find yourself talking to the painting, whispering words of comfort in the empty room. You weren't just living in Isabelle's story. You were becoming a part of it. One morning, you reached your breaking point. The painting had to go. It felt cold to the touch. Your plan was simple. Drive to the Alps and throw it into a ravine. But Isabelle, it seemed, had other plans. Your car battery was dead. 3 taxis canceled on you. It was as if an unseen force was conspiring against you. The feeling was palpable. The painting did not want to leave. Defeated and trembling, you brought the painting back to the apartment. As you hung it back in its place, you could have sworn you heard a soft sigh of contentment. A storm broke over Lyon. The wind howled and the rain fell in sheets. And then, with a deafening crack of thunder, the lights went out. Total darkness. You were trapped, alone in the dark. With her, a flash of lightning. She was no longer in the painting. The silhouette of a woman in a long, dark dress stood on the opposite side of the room. Another flash. She was closer. You were paralyzed with fear. You could smell withered lavender, a soft rustle of silk as she moved again, closer still. Then you felt it, a deathly cold that enveloped you, an icy breath on your cheek, and then a whisper right next to your ear, a voice ancient and full of sorrow. Tu es à moi, it said. You are mine. A final, blinding flash of lightning. Isabelle's face was right in front of yours, inches away, her features twisted by a century of rage, her eyes black pits of despair. The next morning, a friend found you sitting on the floor, your eyes wide open. You were staring at the empty space on the opposite wall. The painting was gone. It had simply vanished. You didn't speak. You didn't react. You just sat there, trapped in a silent world. Weeks later, you were moved to a sanatorium. You still didn't speak. Your time was spent drawing. You drew only one thing, over and over again. Not the whole face, just a pair of eyes. Dark, deep, haunting eyes, filled with an unspeakable sadness and rage. The story of the unhinged artist of Croix became a local anecdote. Your apartment was eventually rented out again. And somewhere, perhaps in a dusty flea market or a forgotten antique shop, An unsigned portrait of a woman with sad eyes waits. It waits for another sensitive pair of eyes to meet its gaze, for someone lonely enough to feel its loneliness, and curious enough to take it home.